My wife finally wore me down and got me to let her give me a haircut, so your eyes can thank her for that. So let's talk about the season finale of Penny Dreadful, City of Angels. This episode is titled The Day of the Dead, and if it's the last episode of the series that we ever get, which it could be, I don't think another season is guaranteed, and I actually tend to think it's unlikely personally. But if it is the last episode we get, I would have to say it was rather disappointing. But before I get into why I think that, with spoilers, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. And if you would give me a like, I'd really appreciate it. So this episode, first I wanted to talk about what happened with Sister Molly, because I think that this was obviously one of the biggest events of this episode. And a lot of it, I think many of us predicted, but a lot of it was just a massive disappointment, I would say. And it's not that I don't think that Sister Molly could get brought to a point where she would commit suicide. I just don't think that John Logan and the writers of this show did the work to get her here. And I kind of feel like to have her go to this level so quickly, while it's obvious that she has these struggles and that she's tried to commit suicide in the past, I'm not saying that she would never commit suicide, because it's obviously that she already has tried to do that. So obviously she would, but I don't think she would in this situation without a lot more of a push. And I don't think that they took the time to get her to this point. Because the episode started off with her and Tiago reconsidering their relationship in the light of the fact that, as Tiago says, we're never going to be able to go out in public together. We can't go to the beach together right now, which is kind of hilarious because they were just at the beach together last episode. Short memory, Tiago. But this is an example of where the show, I agree, like in real life, this couple would have a lot of problems. The world would definitely have been against them, particularly in 1937, I believe the show is taking place. I still have a problem with this because while I understand what they're trying to convey, they're telling us something that they haven't really shown us. They haven't really shown the kind of discrimination that Molly and Tiago would face out in the real world. And what they have shown us is these characters gallivanting around all over Los Angeles all season, at the fair, at the beach, on the boardwalk. And it seems like they were having a gay old time and no one seemed to care. So to suddenly have this become an issue without actually having shown it to us, it's kind of, I think, poor storytelling. They took it out of a nosedive and basically had Sister Molly offer to run off with Tiago. Now, obviously, I didn't think this was going to happen either. I was like, they're going to break up. There's no way that they're actually going to run off, because how will the show continue? For one thing, Tiago will be nowhere near his family, but for another thing, he'll be nowhere near this story if the story continues. So obviously, I was just waiting to see what would happen to break them up after they agreed to do this. And it turns out, of course, as many of us guessed, that Sister Adelaide had the Haslets killed in order to protect Sister Molly. This was kind of vague. I feel like her rationale for having the Haslets killed, including children, doesn't really seem particularly clear. I think that it was one of those things where this character is clearly not altogether mentally stable, so I guess we can accept stuff because she's crazy, but I didn't think that they really explained very well why she would actually do this, because it's pretty clear that Sister Molly has had relationships before with people. So, and in this day and age, it's not like this, they had Twitter or the internet where, like, if people found out, that it would spread all over the place, because I think that, you know, with an organization like them, I think that they would be able to counter any rumors that happened, and they would be able to continue their ministry despite, you know, people finding out that Sister Molly had an affair with a married man. But at any rate, I didn't think that this made a ton of sense for Sister Molly to kill herself based on this. And what frustrated me to no end about this scene was that instead of confronting the problems that she has power to confront, instead of going and saying, my mother murdered people, justice requires that she goes to jail, instead of making the speech that she was talking about making. And this, it's amazing how timely this show is. It doesn't have a lot to say about issues, but I think there's a lot of things that are definitely relevant to our current political climate and to things that are going on in America right now. She's going to give this speech to do good, to help the Chicano community, and instead she kills herself. Now, the scene, it was well shot. I liked the integration of Santa Muerte into this scene. I thought it was as well shot and as well acted as a Sister Molly suicide scene could be. Now, I don't really know why John Logan made this decision, but I have a serious concern that he made this decision just so he wouldn't have to write Sister Molly's speech. And again, I think this would have been a really, really hard speech to write because you have to find a way to not coming across as a white savior trope. So, I think there was so many things he was going to have to try to balance here that I wouldn't have envied him the task of writing this speech for Sister Molly. But for this character to walk away from that responsibility, to walk away from the good she could do and to kill herself, and to walk away from Tiago and do this, I was flabbergasted. I couldn't believe that they went in this direction. They could have done a number of things to make this more convincing. They could have had her given this speech and then had it been really, really poorly received and had her become despairing that she can't make any changes and that the whole religious community that she's supposed to be leading won't listen to her when it really matters, and then she kills herself. That would have been more impactful, I think, but this to me just felt like a lazy writing decision. And on top of that, they hardly dealt with this at all. Like, the character just disappears, she's dead, and then Tiago doesn't hardly react to it. Like, I felt like obviously they don't have time, there's just too much going on for him to sit around moping the entire episode. But I imagine if they do another season, that's when they're going to try to show his reaction to this. But this show has a bad habit of pushing emotional things down the road and having them come up later instead of dealing with them in the moment that they happen. And I get it. Sometimes that's how grief is, but I don't think that that's why the show is doing it. I think they're doing it because they just don't have time. They've just got too many plates spinning and they don't have time for Tiago to properly react to Sister Molly's death. It could also be because she's not going to stay dead. I certainly would hope she isn't, but I don't really know how you bring her back without it being undercutting the story and the world and the stakes, but we'll see what they do if they get a chance to do anything else. I felt like this episode started off really well with the tension as Lewis enters the dance club and tells Tiago to get his family and Sister Molly out of there because everybody's going to riot once they find out what happened to Diego. And it was astonishing to me because I was feeling really tense and I thought things were going to go bad. I thought that Tiago was going to have his life threatened by the crowd. But shockingly, we have Fly Rico, who Sebastian Chacon really deserves more work off of this. He was really, really quite good, and I think a much better performer personally than I think Mateo is. I would have rather seen more of Fly Rico and less of Mateo. But he comes forward and says, hey, we can't respond this way, or they're going to think we're the animals that they have been saying we are. And I get this tension. I think it's something we see playing out right now where people's response to horrible, horrible things is what people focus on instead of the horrible, horrible things that lead people to these responses. It was interesting because I didn't anticipate Fly Rico reacting that way. He's been built up to react that way all season because he has been this person who kind of sees where these things will head. He's been this person who sees what the consequences will be if everybody riots. And he's been this peacemaker. And it was a real bummer when he got murdered by Magda in the guise of Rio. And I'm kind of confused by this because I thought the whole point of Magda was that she was supposed to be the devil on people's shoulder who's kind of causing them to give in to their worst natures. But here she actively kills someone because they're blocking what she wants to happen. And I was, to say the least, I thought that was a little confusing. I felt like it would have been more impactful perhaps, and I don't think this would have been believable, but I feel like it would have been more impactful if she had convinced Mateo to kill Fly Rico, or convinced, another character to do it, and then we could have seen her continue to be the temptress rather than this person who's actively using violent methods. I also felt it was really interesting to see that I kind of had assumed this was the case, but that they had Elsa and Rio acknowledge each other, that she can be in two places at once. It was kind of obvious that that would have to be the case, because it's not like she could be, shuttling back and forth to be with Dr. Kraft and to be at City Hall and to be with the Chicano community all at once. But it is interesting that they actually acknowledge that this is what is going on. But I think this sequence was tragic because you see the Chicano community trying to handle this situation the right way, trying to kind of, in a similar parallel to the peaceful protests that we saw in the wake of George Floyd's death. Again, the group was just going to bury him. There's nothing wrong with that. They shouldn't be hindered from doing that. And to have Rio and Elsa conspire to create this violent situation where the city uprolls and Councilman Townsend is given this opportunity to build his highway, as he's been seeking to do all season, when things had looked really grim for him, like he was going to lose his political career, like it was all over, to have him suddenly, granted this reprieve in the form of these riots, which allow him to spread the narrative that this community is a problem and that the highway should go through. It's a bummer. It's a major bummer. And again, it's interesting because there were moments where you thought that Councilman Townsend might not be all that bad, but we're back to him being very much a demagogue. And if you didn't think there were Trump parallels this whole season, I don't know what you think of the fact that, as Tiago puts it, these aren't highways, these are walls built to separate our community from the rest of America. This isn't the United States of America anymore, as he says. I also feel like John Logan, I have appreciated what he's tried to explore with Dr. Kraft and how he's this man who he's at one point in this episode telling his son not to hate and warning him against hate and advising him against where hate will lead him. And this has been, consistent with the Dr. Kraft that we've seen up till this point. But I think where John Logan takes the character didn't really work for me, because again, I felt like, I'm not saying I couldn't see him being led to the Nazis. I'm just saying I don't feel like they did the work this episode, because one second he's making a speech against hate to his son, the next second he's doing the Hitler salute. And again, not a problem for me that he is doing the Hitler salute at the end of this episode, but I feel like people don't just go from being good people or relatively good people to being Nazis that quickly. And I also think that it's a problem because it muddies the waters again, because it's like, I think that, yes, there's a lot of people that are driven to bad causes by their fears and by their concerns. But at the same time, I don't think that if you didn't already have some racist ideas in your head, if you didn't already have some proclivities towards that kind of thinking, then you're not going to get driven there so easily. And I don't think that they ever portrayed Dr. Kraft as having those types of feelings or beliefs. The other big event this episode was the death of Brian, and we didn't get enough of Maria. I mean, we got a little brief snippet of her at the funeral, and we got a brief snippet of her and Dottie hanging out, but we didn't get enough of Dottie or Maria this season, in my opinion, and it would have been nice to actually see them interact a little bit while they were hanging out at the Vega family home. But the minute that Brian said to Lewis, well, where are you taking me? I knew what was going to happen. I was like, they're going to kill him, because he, as I was expecting, was involved with the nuclear or the atomic bomb, sorry, rather. And, you know, of course, they can't let him fall into the Nazi hands. Now, this, again, was one of those things I just didn't think that they dealt with enough. Like, I understand that Lewis could be driven to this position where he's like, well, we can't let the Nazis get their hands on this technology. We have to kill Brian. And Nathan Lane did a lot of selling this scene with his acting and the way he told him, look at the stars, Brian. But there was just a lot of things about this sequence that were just really poorly written. Like, I was like, would Brian really sit there and be like, yes, I'm going to look at the stars. The stars are so interesting, and not notice Lewis standing behind him with a gun. Really? His peripheral vision is that bad? I just don't buy it. And I don't buy that he wouldn't see this coming. But again, it's one of the morally relativistic things that we've seen Lewis and Tiago do this season, and everyone in the car is a party to it. Like, they didn't show Tiago kind of deciding to go along with it, but clearly he's still with Lewis at the end of the episode, so clearly he is a party to this and he's agreed to it. And after what they did to Diego and after what they've done to Brian, these are definitely characters in the anti-hero category. Like, I get that they have good motivations for a lot of it, but they're still doing terrible things. That's a murder. Brian, he had done nothing to deserve this. And quite honestly, like, there's other scientists out there. There's other people that are going to help create the atomic bomb. Are you going to kill all of them to keep the atomic bomb from being developed? Are you going to kill all of them to keep the Germans from getting this technology? I don't think that this was developed adequately or thought through. And it was only clear to me it was going to happen because of the setup that they're driving at night, and there's just kind of this ominous feeling to the scene. It wasn't set up earlier in the season that it would feel, from Lewis's perspective, like it was necessary to do this. So again, it was an interesting scene, but I just didn't think that it was built up enough. So that was kind of how I felt about this episode overall. There were a lot of interesting scenes, a lot of important moments, but I just didn't think they got the adequate build-up to or the adequate follow-up. The last thing I want to mention is, obviously, we had Tiago in the cemetery and he met Magda, and it was interesting because she talked to him directly, and this is the first time that we've seen a human character directly speak to Magda. And I was disappointed earlier in the episode when he met Rio for the first time, or seemed to meet her for the first time. Like, they had briefly seen each other in the passing, but this was the first time where they'd actually been like face to face, and he didn't have any reaction. So I was like, oh, well, I guess there goes all our theories. But then she showed up in the graveyard, and again, it's unclear what the repercussions of this scene are going to be, because at the end of the season, Tiago is with Lewis, and it's unclear what actions he's going to take going forward, what path he's going to follow. But it'll be interesting if they get more seasons to see where this goes, to see what direction Tiago goes in with the push from Magda. So those are my thoughts on the season finale. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If you're interested in seeing more videos like this one, please consider subscribing. And as always, you can watch more videos right now.